The moonflowers were dying again. Isolde Ravencross stood in the garden she'd once tended with such care, watching petals blacken and curl at the edges like paper held too close to flame. The flowers had been thriving yesterday, luminous white blooms that opened only under starlight, their fragrance sweet enough to mask even the metallic tang of blood that perpetually haunted the Nightbourne castle. Now they withered as if poisoned, and Isolde knew with bone-deep certainty that this was an omen. She should have left when she had the chance. 3 nights ago, when the castle servants had started avoiding her gaze. 2 nights ago, when the Dowager Queen Morgantha had smiled at her across the dinner table with teeth too sharp and eyes too knowing. Yesterday, when she'd found her private study ransacked, documents scattered, the hidden compartment behind the loose stone near the window left conspicuously open and empty. But she'd stayed because she was a fool in love with a vampire king, and fools always believed they could outrun their fate. The sound of boots on marble echoed through the corridor behind her, heavy, purposeful, accompanied by the distinctive ring of armor. Guards. Multiple sets. Isolde's fingers tightened on the watering can she'd been holding, water sloshing over the rim to darken the stone at her feet. She turned slowly, already knowing what she would see but hoping desperately that she was wrong. King Draven Nocturne stood at the garden entrance, and the man she loved was nowhere in his face. His eyes, usually warm amber when they looked at her, the only warmth in his cold eternity, he'd once said, were black from edge to edge. Vampire eyes went dark like that for only 2 reasons, bloodlust or rage. Given that his hand trembled slightly where he clutched a piece of parchment, rage seemed the more likely culprit. Draven, her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "What's wrong?" He laughed, and the sound made the remaining moonflowers shrivel and die. The air itself seemed to recoil from the bitterness in that laugh. Behind him, 6 guards in the black and crimson livery of the royal family fanned out, blocking any possibility of retreat. Not that she would have run. Where did one run when the most powerful vampire in the realm wanted you found? "What's wrong?" Draven's voice was soft, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. He stepped into the garden, and Isolde noticed with distant, detached clarity that the guards stayed at the threshold. Whatever was about to happen, they wanted no part of witnessing it. "You stand here among dead flowers, asking me what's wrong, as if you don't know. As if you haven't been planning this for months." Isolde's heart began to hammer against her ribs. "Planning what?" "Draven, I don't understand." "Don't." The word cracked through the air like a whip, and Isolde flinched despite herself. Draven closed the distance between them in 2 strides, vampire speed, barely visible, and thrust the parchment at her. "Don't lie to me. Not now. Not after everything." Her hands shook as she took the letter. The moment she saw the code, complex, layered, professional, her blood turned to ice water in her veins. She knew this cipher. She'd been intercepting messages like this for 8 months, each one more damning than the last, each one another piece of evidence in the case she'd been building. But this letter wasn't one she'd intercepted. This letter was written in her hand. "This isn't," she started, but the words died when she met his eyes again. There was nothing there. No love, no trust, no benefit of the doubt. Just certainty and betrayal and a rage so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air between them. "Coded messages to the Lichen Hunter Coalition," Draven said, his voice empty now, scraped clean of all emotion. "Detailed intelligence about our defensive positions. Names of our allies. Locations of our safe houses. Supply routes. Everything they would need to destroy us from within." He tilted his head, studying her as if she were a specimen he'd never seen before. "How long, Isolde? How long have you been selling my people to the hunters? How many deaths are you responsible for?" "None." The word burst from her. "Draven, this is a forgery. Someone is setting me up." "A forgery?" He turned away from her, shoulders rigid beneath his black coat. "Of course. How convenient. And I suppose the secret meetings you've been attending every Wednesday for the past 6 months are also fabrications? The locked doors. The whispered conversations that stop when I enter a room." Isolde's mind raced. The meetings she'd been coordinating with Prince Kael's personal guards, trying to protect him from his own grandmother's assassination plot. The locked doors she'd been documenting Morgantha's treason, building a case that would be ironclad enough to bring before the council without starting a civil war. The whispered conversations, desperate attempts to keep Cale alive while gathering evidence against the one person in the kingdom Treason trusted more than anyone. But she had no proof now. Whatever evidence she'd collected was gone, replaced with this damning forgery. And from the look on Treason's face, no explanation she could offer would penetrate the wall of certainty that had already formed in his mind. "I was trying to protect your brother," she said anyway, because what else could she do? "Treason, there's a plot against Cale. Your mother." "My mother," he spun back to face her, and there was something almost like grief in his eyes before it was consumed by fury. "You dare to implicate my mother in your schemes? Is that your defense? Accuse the Dowager Queen to deflect from your own guilt? It's not an accusation, it's the truth. The letters I was intercepting, the meetings with the guards, everything. I have documentation, evidence, it's all in my chambers." "Your chambers have been searched." The new voice was silk and poison. Dowager Queen Morgantha glided into the garden like liquid mercury, her silver gown trailing behind her, her ageless face arranged in an expression of theatrical sorrow. "We found nothing but more incriminating correspondence. My poor son. To be so thoroughly deceived by something so common." Isolde's stomach dropped. Morgantha had taken everything. Of course she had. The woman had 3,000 years of experience in political machinations. She'd probably been planning this moment since the day Treason had first brought a human into the castle as his consort. "Mother," Treason said, not taking his eyes off Isolde. "Leave us." "Are you certain? She could be dangerous." "Leave us." The command in his voice was absolute, and even Morgantha knew not to push further. She inclined her head with false deference and withdrew, but not before giving Isolde a smile that promised suffering. Silence filled the garden. Somewhere in the castle, a clock chimed midnight. The witching hour. How appropriate. "I love you," Isolde said quietly, desperately. "Treason, I love you. I would never betray you. Please, just give me a chance to prove." "Love," he laughed again, that terrible sound. "You speak of love while holding evidence of your treachery in your hands. Do you think I'm a fool, Isolde? Do you think 2 years of warming my bed has made me soft enough to ignore treason?" The cruelty in his words stole her breath. This was worse than rage. This was contempt. "I trusted you," Treason continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I gave you everything. Access to my kingdom, my resources, my secrets. I defied centuries of tradition to make a human my consort. I loved you more than my own immortal soul. And you," his voice cracked, just for an instant, before hardening again. "You made me a fool." "No," Isolde whispered, tears burning tracks down her cheeks. "No, Treason, please." "Guards!" His shout made her jump. The 6 armored vampires appeared instantly, as if they'd been waiting just out of sight for this exact moment. "Seize her." Silver chains. "Treason, no." But they were already on her. Strong hands gripped her arms, wrenching them behind her back. The watering can fell from her nerveless fingers, shattering on stone. And then came the chains, silver, burning, specifically designed to contain vampires but even more agonizing against human flesh. Isolde screamed as the metal seared her wrists, the smell of her own burning skin filling her nostrils. "Take her to the throne room," Treason commanded, his back still turned. "Assemble the entire court. Every noble in the kingdom will witness what happens to traitors." "Treason." Isolde struggled against the guards, but they were ancient and strong, and she was just a human woman who'd had the extraordinary arrogance to believe she could matter to a vampire king. "Treason, look at me. Look at me." He turned then, and what she saw in his face would haunt her through everything that came after. Not hatred would have been easier to bear. What she saw was nothing. A door slamming shut. A decision made. The death of everything they'd been to each other. "You will address me as your majesty," he said coldly. "Or not at all." The guards dragged her from the garden. The last thing she saw was Treason standing among the dead moonflowers, his fists clenched, his shoulders rigid, as he stared at the place where she'd stood and pretended not to hear her screaming his name. The throne room was a cathedral of shadow and malice. Massive obsidian pillars stretched toward a ceiling lost in darkness, each one carved with the history of the Nightborn dynasty, 3,000 years of conquest, power, and blood. Hundreds of candles burned in iron sconces, but their light seemed swallowed by the pervading gloom, creating more shadows than illumination. The air smelled of stone and old magic and the particular coldness that came from concentrating too many vampires in one space. The room was packed. Word had spread through the castle with supernatural speed, the king's consort, accused of treason. Every vampire noble who could reach the throne room in time was there, lining the walls, filling the balconies, their eyes glowing with various colors in the dimness. Some looked at Isolde with pity as she was dragged down the center aisle. Most looked at her with something far uglier. A human had risen above her station, had taken a place among immortals, and now she would fall. The schadenfreude was palpable. The guards threw her down at the base of the dais. The silver chains kept her on her knees, and when she tried to rise, one of the guards pressed a hand to her shoulder, not roughly, but firmly. A warning. She subsided, focusing on keeping her breathing steady despite the pain radiating from her wrists. The burned flesh was already blistering, and the smell made her want to vomit. Treason sat on his throne of black stone, carved from a single piece of obsidian mined from the heart of a dying star, or so the legends claimed. He looked like something from a nightmare made flesh, beautiful and terrible and utterly unreachable. The crown of black diamonds on his head caught what little light existed and seemed to devour it. The room fell silent. Even the whispers died away. When a vampire king commanded attention, he received it absolutely. Isolde Ravencross, his voice carried through the cavernous space without effort. You stand accused of high treason against the Nightborn kingdom. The charges are as follows: espionage, conspiracy with enemy forces, betrayal of the crown, and the willful endangerment of this realm and its people. How do you plead? Not guilty. Her voice was smaller than his, but it didn't shake. She had that, at least. Her dignity. Her truth. Even if no one believed it. My lord, if you would allow me to explain. She speaks out of turn. Morgantha's voice rang out from somewhere to Isolde's right. The Dowager Queen stepped forward into the light, her hands clasped before her in an attitude of sorrowful disappointment. My son, I know this is difficult. To discover that one you held dear has betrayed you so thoroughly. But you must not let sentiment cloud your judgment. The evidence is overwhelming. Mother, Treason said quietly, dangerously, she will have her chance to speak. Will she? Morgantha turned to address the assembled court, her voice rising with theatrical passion. And will you believe her lies? Will you let her tears and protestations of innocence sway you from what you know to be true? This human has made a fool of our king. She has compromised our security, put all of our lives at risk, shared our most intimate secrets with those who would see us destroyed, and for what? Money, ideology, some misguided loyalty to her own kind. She whirled back to Treason. She does not deserve a platform for her deceptions. She deserves only justice. The crowd murmured agreement. Someone in the balcony threw something, a goblet, perhaps, or a bottle. It shattered near Isolde's head, spraying her with what smelled like blood wine, the thick, clotted vintage vampires preferred. Isolde flinched but didn't cry out. Enough. Treason's word cracked through the room like lightning. Instant silence followed. He stood, descending the dais steps with measured precision. Each footfall seemed to echo in Isolde's chest. He stopped directly in front of her, forcing her to crane her neck back to meet his gaze. Isolde. I will ask you questions. You will answer them truthfully. And if I sense even the slightest hint of deception, he let the threat hang unfinished. Isolde swallowed hard. I understand, Your Majesty. Something flickered in his eyes at the formal address, pain, perhaps, or regret, but it was gone too quickly to be certain. The meetings, he said. Every Wednesday at twilight, you left the castle grounds. You told me you were visiting the village market, collecting herbs for your garden. Where did you actually go? I was meeting with your brother's personal guards, Isolde said. The words came out in a rush. At the old watchtower on the eastern border. Treason, Cale is in danger. There's a plot to assassinate him and frame the lichens for it, which would give certain parties justification to start a war that would weaken both kingdoms. Kael Draven's laugh was bitter. You're using my brother as your excuse? How convenient. How perfectly calculated to appeal to my protective instincts. It's not an excuse. It's the truth. Ask him, ask the guards. We have. Morgantha glided forward, her expression one of false sympathy. Prince Kael confirms meeting with you several times. What he does not confirm is any discussion of threats to his safety. According to him, you claimed to be coordinating a surprise celebration for his upcoming birthday. She turned to the crowd. A clever cover for her treasonous activities, wouldn't you say? Isolde's mind reeled. Kael would never, but of course he would, if he thought he was protecting her. She'd told him to maintain the cover story if anyone asked, never imagining it would be used against her in a trial for treason. And now her attempt to save his life was being twisted into evidence of her guilt. The documents, Draven continued, his voice like ice. You kept extensive records. Coded letters, maps, lists of names. Where did you hide them? In my chambers. Behind the loose stone near the window, just left of the bookshelf. Draven, please, they're evidence of your mother's plot, not mine. We found nothing there, Morgantha interrupted smoothly. Nothing but empty space and more of your incriminating correspondence with the hunters. Because you took them, Isolde shouted, struggling against the chains despite the agony it caused. You took everything and replaced it with forgeries. You've been planning this for months, poisoning me slowly with Nightsbane so I'd be too weak to fight back when you finally sprang your trap. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, accusations flying. To accuse the Dowager Queen of such elaborate treachery, it was unthinkable. Insane. The desperate flailing of a guilty woman with no defense left. Silence. Draven's roar shook the chandeliers. The crowd fell quiet, but the damage was done. Isolde could see it in their faces, she'd lost them completely. Even those who might have been sympathetic now looked at her with disgust. Accusing Morgantha was a step too far. Draven stared down at her, and for just a moment, one brief, agonizing moment, she saw doubt flicker across his face. He wanted to believe her. Some part of him, the part that had loved her, that had planted moonflowers in a garden just to see her smile, wanted desperately to believe there was some explanation that would make this all make sense. But then his jaw tightened, and she watched the doubt die. My mother, he said quietly, each word carefully controlled, has served this kingdom for 3 millennia. She has guided 5 kings, prevented countless catastrophes, and safeguarded our people through wars, plagues, and the long darkness of the hunter purges. You have been here 2 years. And you expect me to believe that she, not you, is the traitor? Yes, Isolde whispered, because what else could she say? Yes, because it's true. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned away, climbing back up the dais steps. When he sat on his throne again, something in his posture had changed. The king had fully consumed the man who'd loved her. I wanted to believe you, he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. Even now, even with all the evidence arrayed against you, part of me wanted to find some explanation that would let me keep you. Do you understand how that feels? To know that your judgment is compromised by emotion? To suspect that you're being manipulated by your own heart? Isolde said nothing. There was nothing to say. But I am not just a man, Draven continued. I am a king. And a king cannot let personal feelings override the safety of his people. The evidence is overwhelming. Your explanations are convenient fabrications designed to cast suspicion on others while absolving yourself. And your accusations against my mother, he shook his head slowly. They reveal the depth of your desperation and the breadth of your betrayal. Draven. You will be silent. The command was absolute. Isolde's mouth snapped shut. Isolde Ravencross, you are hereby stripped of all titles, all privileges, all protections afforded to you as consort to the crown. You are declared traitor to the realm and enemy of the Nightborn kingdom. The words fell like hammer blows. Each one seemed to physically impact her chest, driving the air from her lungs. You will be taken to the crimson depths, where you will be held until you confess the full extent of your betrayal. Until you provide names every co-conspirator, every piece of intelligence you sold, every life you endangered. And you will remain there until I am satisfied that you have told me everything. No, Isolde breathed. No, Draven, please. But the guards were already hauling her to her feet. The chains tightened, burning deeper. She could feel her skin blistering, peeling, the agony making her vision white at the edges. Your Majesty, she tried one last time, using the formal address he'd demanded, hoping it would pierce through his anger. I love you. I have only ever loved you. Please, don't do this. For just an instant, his mask slipped. She saw pain flash across his face, raw and devastating. But then it was gone, replaced by something harder. Love, he said softly, so only she could hear as the guards dragged her past the throne, is not enough. Trust is what matters. And you destroyed that the moment you chose betrayal over truth. I chose nothing but you, she whispered back. I have always chosen you. He turned away, his profile carved from stone. Take her. As the guards pulled her toward the dungeon entrance, Isolde heard Draven speak again, his voice carrying through the throne room with terrible clarity. One more thing. The court fell silent again. To ensure there is no confusion about where my loyalties lie. To demonstrate that traitors hold no power over this throne or its king. Isolde's heart stuttered. She knew, somehow, what was coming. Knew it with the sick certainty of inevitability. Lady Sylvana Moreau. Draven extended his hand, and a woman emerged from the shadows near the throne, tall, elegant, with hair like spun copper and eyes that had always watched Draven with barely concealed hunger. You have done me the honor of accepting my courtship. I would be pleased if you would stand with me now, as my companion and, in time, my queen. The room erupted in applause. Sylvana's smile was triumphant as she glided forward, taking Draven's hand and pressing herself against his side in a display of possession that made Isolde's stomach turn. She watched as Draven's arm came around Sylvana's waist, the same way he'd held her, the same casual intimacy that had once meant everything. My king, Sylvana purred, just loud enough for Isolde to hear. You honor me. The honor is mine, my lady. His voice was warm when he spoke to Sylvana. Warm in a way it hadn't been when he'd addressed Isolde. He was doing it deliberately, Isolde realized with sick clarity. Hurting her. Punishing her. Making sure she understood exactly how thoroughly she'd been replaced. Isolde felt something inside her chest crack. Not her heart, that would have been too simple, too clean. This was deeper. The foundation of her soul, the bedrock of her identity, fracturing under the weight of his betrayal. Because that's what this was. Betrayal. He'd promised to love her until the stars went dark. He'd sworn that nothing and no one could come between them. He'd looked into her eyes 1,000 times and told her she was his salvation, his moonlight, the only warmth in his cold eternity. And he'd thrown it all away without even trying to believe in her. No, she whispered, but the word was lost in the crowd's cheers and Sylvana's delighted laugh. The guards dragged her through the doors and down, down, down into the depths of the castle. Down stone steps worn smooth by centuries of prisoners' feet. Down past the wine cellars and storage rooms. Down past the burial vaults where ancient nightborn kings slept their eternal sleep. Down into the darkness where the castle kept its worst secrets and its most dangerous prisoners. The Crimson Depths. Even the name was a warning. The dungeons had been built during the Blood Wars, 3,000 years ago, when vampire fought vampire for supremacy and prisoners weren't kept for information, they were kept for sport. The stones down here were stained dark with centuries of suffering. The air tasted of rust and despair. And the cold vampire dungeons were kept cold enough to slow human metabolism, to make every moment of consciousness an exercise in endurance. Her cell was small. 10 feet by 10 feet, with a ceiling so low she could touch it if she stood on her toes. No window. No furniture except a wooden bucket in the corner that she tried not to think about. The only light came from a single torch in the corridor outside, its flame guttering and dim. They chained her to the wall, proper manacles this time, not silver but enchanted iron that suppressed magic. Not that she had magic. She was just human. But the iron had other properties. It was cold in a way that went beyond temperature, leaching warmth from her body, making her bones ache. For what it's worth, one of the guards said quietly as they prepared to leave, I don't believe you did it. But that won't matter down here. The cell door slammed shut. The lock turned with a sound like finality itself. And then there was only darkness and cold and the sound of her own breathing, harsh and ragged in the confined space. Isolde pulled experimentally against the chains. They didn't budge. The manacles were designed to hold creatures far stronger than her. She was trapped completely, utterly, with no hope of escape. Above her, impossibly distant, she could hear the faint sounds of celebration. Music. Laughter. The court was already moving on, already accepting Sylvana as Draven's new companion. Already forgetting that Isolde Ravencross had ever existed. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe through the panic. Tried to think. There had to be a way out of this. Some way to prove her innocence, to expose Morgantha, to make Draven see the truth. But in the darkness and cold of the crimson depths, hope felt like a distant memory. Like something that belonged to a different person in a different life. Like the love she'd thought was unbreakable. Like the man who'd planted moonflowers in a garden just to watch her smile. The torturer came on the second day. Isolde had been drifting in and out of consciousness, the cold made sleep difficult, and the chains made comfort impossible. Her wrists were raw from the iron manacles, her shoulders screaming from being held in one position for so long. She'd stopped feeling her fingers sometime during the night. The cell door opened. Torchlight flooded in, stabbing at her eyes. She squinted against it, trying to make out the figure in the doorway. He was ancient. She could tell that immediately from the quality of his stillness, the absolute lack of movement that only came with millennia of existence. His face was a mass of old scars, his eyes milky white from too many centuries spent in darkness. When he smiled, his fangs were yellowed and worn. "Good morning, traitor," he said pleasantly. His voice had a rasp to it, like gravel sliding over stone. "My name is Vex. I'll be facilitating your confession." "I have nothing to confess," Isolde said. Her voice came out hoarse from disuse. "I'm innocent." They all say that at first Vex stepped fully into the cell, and she saw what he carried, a leather case, old and well-worn. He set it on the ground and opened it carefully, revealing an array of instruments that made her stomach turn. "But don't worry. We have time. All the time in the world. And I am very, very good at what I do." He selected something from the case, a thin blade, the metal dark and stained. "Now then. Let's start with something simple. Your contacts in the Lichen Hunter Coalition. Names and locations." "I don't have any contacts. I've never even met a Lichen Hunter." Wrong answer. The blade moved faster than her eyes could follow. Pain exploded across her left shoulder, sharp, precise, deliberately shallow. Enough to hurt but not enough to kill or even seriously injure. A warning. Isolde bit back a scream, tasting blood where she'd bitten her lip. "Let's try again," Vex said calmly. "Your contacts. I don't have any." The blade moved again. And again. Each cut measured, calculated, designed to maximize suffering while avoiding any real danger. Vex worked with the precision of an artist who'd had 3,000 years to perfect his craft. After the first hour, Isolde was crying. After the second, she was begging not for mercy, but for him to listen, to believe her, to understand she had nothing to confess. After the third, she'd gone quiet, conserving her strength, enduring. "You're tougher than you look," Vex observed as he cleaned his instruments. "Most humans break much faster. But we've only just begun. Tomorrow we'll try something different. And the day after that, something else. Eventually, you'll tell me everything. They always do." He left her bleeding, the cuts shallow enough that she wouldn't die but deep enough that every movement was agony. The cold air burned in the wounds. She couldn't stop shaking. This became her existence. Days blurred into a nightmare cycle of pain, darkness, and questions she couldn't answer. Vex came regularly, always polite, always patient, always ready with new methods of breaking her body while keeping her conscious and aware. He asked about contacts. About meetings. About intelligence she'd supposedly sold. About plans and conspiracies and betrayals she'd never committed. And no matter how many times she told him the truth, that she was innocent, that Morgantha had framed her, that she'd been trying to protect the kingdom, he just smiled and reached for another instrument. But the physical torture, as horrific as it was, wasn't the worst part. The worst part came at night. The castle was built with ancient magic, its stones and chambers connected by acoustics that defied normal physics. Sound traveled in strange ways through night-born halls, following paths that seemed to intentionally amplify certain frequencies while muting others. It was a security feature, originally a way for the king to hear what was being said anywhere in the castle if he chose to listen. Isolde's cell was directly below the royal chambers. The first night she heard them, she thought she was hallucinating from blood loss. Sylvanas' laugh, high and musical and victorious. Then Draven's voice, lower, responding to something she'd said. The creak of furniture. The rustle of fabric. And then sounds that drove spikes through Isolde's chest. Sounds of intimacy. Of pleasure. Of two people sharing what she'd thought belonged only to her and Draven. She covered her ears, pressing her palms hard against her head until it hurt. But the manacles only allowed her so much movement, and the sounds found her anyway. They always found her. You're thinking of her, aren't you? Sylvanas' voice drifted down one night, clear as if she were standing in the cell. There was amusement in her tone, and something sharper. Possessiveness. A pause. Then Draven's voice, cold and final, she's dead to me. Less than dead. She's nothing. Isolde made a sound, half sob, half whimper. She pulled against the chains until her wrists bled, as if she could somehow escape from the words if she tried hard enough. Nothing, Draven repeated, and there was no hesitation in his voice. No regret. Just certainty. That's when something inside Isolde simply stopped. She'd been fighting. Even through the torture, even through the darkness and cold and isolation, she'd been holding on to some core of herself. Some belief that this couldn't last forever. That Draven would realize his mistake. That someone would find the evidence she'd hidden. That truth would prevail. But hearing him call her nothing, hearing him say it with such conviction while he was with another woman, while Isolde bled in chains he'd ordered, that killed the last spark of hope she'd been nursing. She stopped pulling against the chains. Stopped trying to explain herself to Vex. Stopped eating the meager food they brought. Stopped crying. Stopped fighting. She simply gave up. Vex noticed immediately. You've gone quiet, he observed during what must have been her 10th or 12th session. She'd lost count of days. That's either very good or very bad. Are you ready to confess? No, Isolde said. Her voice was flat, empty. I have nothing to confess. Do what you want. It doesn't matter anymore. He studied her with those milky eyes, and for the first time since he'd started torturing her, he looked uncertain. You should fight back. They always fight back. Why? What's the point? She meant it. What was the point of fighting when the one person whose opinion mattered had already judged and condemned her? What was the point of holding on to truth when lies had already won? What was the point of surviving when survival meant existing in this hell indefinitely? Vex left without finishing the session. Isolde barely noticed. Above her, she heard Draven's footsteps pacing the royal chamber. Back and forth, like he couldn't settle. She wondered vaguely if he was having trouble sleeping. If guilt was keeping him awake. She hoped it was. It was a petty, bitter thought, but she held on to it anyway. Let him be restless. Let him be uncomfortable. Let him wonder, just a little, if he'd made the right choice. Let him regret. The letter arrived in Draven's hands 3 months after Isolde's imprisonment. He was in a council meeting, listening to reports about border skirmishes with the Lycan territories, when a messenger burst in, young, terrified, knowing that interrupting the king carried severe consequences but also knowing that this couldn't wait. Your Majesty, the messenger stammered, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. A letter. Intercepted by our scouts on the northern border. It's addressed to the Dowager Queen, from the Lycans. The room went silent. Morgantha, seated at Draven's right hand, went very still. Give it to me, Draven commanded. The messenger practically threw the letter at him before fleeing. Draven broke the seal, unmistakably Lycan, bearing the mark of their Alpha Council, and began to read. The color drained from his face. Not possible for most vampires, but Draven had recently fed, and his skin still held some warmth. Now it fled, leaving him pale as death. Your Majesty, one of the council members leaned forward. What does it say? Draven didn't answer. His hands had started to shake. His eyes moved over the words again and again, as if he couldn't quite process what he was reading. The letter was detailed. Precise. It thanked Morgantha for her continued cooperation in their mutual endeavor. It outlined payments received and intelligence provided, defensive positions, supply routes, names of allies. It expressed satisfaction with the removal of the human obstacle and anticipated that the assassination of Prince Kael would proceed as planned within the month. It was signed by the Alpha Council and countersigned by a vampire, the handwriting unmistakably Morgantha's. And attached to it, carefully preserved, were copies of other letters. Dozens of them. All in the same code Isolde had been accused of using. All genuinely written by Morgantha over the course of 18 months. Mother, Draven said quietly. Too quietly. Would you care to explain this? Morgantha's expression didn't change. I have no idea what you're referring to, my son. Clearly that letter is a forgery designed to sow discord. It bears your seal. Your handwriting. Your cipher. All of which can be duplicated by those with sufficient skill and motive. Get out. Draven's roar shook the chamber. All of you, except my mother. Get out. Now. The council members fled. Even the guards stationed at the doors withdrew, sensing that what was about to happen was too dangerous to witness. When they were alone, Draven stood. His movements were controlled, precise, but there was something volatile underneath. Something on the edge of breaking. Tell me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me this is a lie. Tell me you didn't do this. Morgantha stood as well, smoothing her silver gown. And if I did? Would it change anything? You've already executed your precious human sentence. She's in the depths, broken and compliant. The damage is done. She wasn't a human. She was Isolde. And his voice cracked. God help me, she was telling the truth. All of it. The plot against Kael. The forged evidence. Everything. Oh, Draven Morgantha's voice held something almost like pity. You're still so young, even after all these centuries. That girl was making you weak. She was influencing your decisions, softening your rule, encouraging you to make peace with the Lycans when we should be consolidating power. I did what needed to be done. You framed her. You tortured her. You poisoned her. The Knight's Bane, she mentioned it during the trial, and I thought she was grasping at straws. A mild dose. Just enough to keep her weak and confused while I maneuvered her into position. She would have died eventually anyway. Knight's Bane is slow but certain. I merely accelerated the timeline. Morgantha tilted her head, studying him. Why do you look at me like that? I protected you. Protected the kingdom. That human was a liability. Now she's removed. You'll thank me eventually. Draven stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. You're insane. I'm practical. There's a difference. You destroyed an innocent woman. You nearly killed my brother. You've been feeding intelligence to our enemies for over a year, intelligence that likely cost vampire lives, all to maintain your own power and influence. To maintain the kingdom's strength, Morgantha corrected. My power and the kingdom's strength are synonymous. They always have been. I have guided 5 kings, Draven. 5. Do you think any of them achieved greatness without my counsel? I think, Draven said slowly, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury, that you have manipulated and controlled from the shadows for so long that you've forgotten you were never meant to rule. That you are not the monarch. That your time ended the moment my father died and I took the crown. Morgantha's eyes flashed. Your father was weak. He fell in love with a human too, your mother, and look how that ended. She died giving birth to Kael, leaving you motherless and your father broken. I swore I wouldn't let history repeat itself. I swore I would protect you from making the same mistake. So you became the mistake instead. Draven turned away from her, his hand trembling as he reached for the bell that would summon the guards. You will be arrested. Tried. convicted of treason, conspiracy, and crimes against the crown. And when you are found guilty, and you will face execution. You wouldn't dare. Watch me. He rang the bell. The sound echoed through the chamber, final and absolute. And may whatever gods still listen have mercy on your soul, because I won't. Guards poured in. Treason gave the order in a voice that brooked no argument. Arrest the Dowager Queen. Silver chains. Maximum security. She is to speak to no one, see no one, have contact with no one until her trial. Morgantha struggled, shouting denials and threats, but the guards were absolute in their obedience. Within moments, she was bound and being dragged from the chamber. When she was gone, Treason stood alone in the council room, the letter from the Lycans still clutched in his hand. And then, for the first time in 3 months, he let himself think about what he'd done. Really think about it. Isolde, kneeling in the garden among dying flowers, begging him to listen. Isolde, screaming his name as the guards dragged her away. Isolde, standing trial with burns on her wrists and desperation in her eyes, telling him about Morgantha's plot while the court laughed at her. Isolde, saying I love you while he called her a traitor. Oh God! Oh God, what had he done? Treason moved without conscious thought, his vampire speed carrying him through the castle in a blur. Down corridors. Down stairs. Down into the depths where he'd sent the woman he loved to be broken and destroyed. He'd visited once, in the early days. Stood outside her cell and listened to her crying, so quiet, trying not to disturb anyone even while she was breaking apart. He'd almost gone in. Almost stopped the nightmare he'd created. But pride and certainty had kept him outside that cell, and he'd walked away believing he was being strong. He'd been a coward. Now he ran through the dungeons, past cells holding lesser criminals, past the torture chambers, down to the deepest level where the worst traitors were kept. Where he'd ordered Isolde kept. Her cell was at the end of the corridor. The door was heavy iron, bound with spells. His hands shook as he worked the locks. The door swung open. The smell hit him first: blood, infection, human waste, and underneath it all the sick-sweet smell of nightsbane poisoning. The single torch in the corridor provided barely enough light to see by, but vampire eyes adjusted quickly to darkness. What he saw made him wish they hadn't. Isolde hung from the wall chains, her weight supported only by her manacled wrists because her legs had long since given out. Her head lolled forward, hair matted with blood and filth, hiding her face. She was so thin, far thinner than 3 months should account for, but of course, nightsbane poisoning would have accelerated her body's deterioration. Her clothes were rags. Her exposed skin was a tapestry of cuts, bruises, burns, and scars in various stages of healing. Isolde, he breathed. She didn't respond. Didn't move. For one terrible moment, he thought she was already dead. Then she raised her head slowly, as if it took all her remaining strength. Her eyes found his, those eyes that had once looked at him with love and trust, and there was nothing in them. No hope. No anger. Just emptiness. You, she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, damaged. Why are you here? Treason stood frozen in the doorway, unable to make his body move forward. Unable to bridge the distance between himself and what he'd done to her. His voice broke. He tried again. Isolde, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know. She laughed. It was a terrible sound, like breaking glass wrapped in tissue paper. Didn't know. Is that what you came to tell me? That you destroyed me by accident? The letter. From the Lycans. It was all true, everything you said. My mother, the plot against Kale, the forged evidence. All of it. The words tumbled out in a rush. Isolde, I was wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. And I. Stop. The word came out flat. Dead. Just stop. I need to get you out of here. I need to. He moved forward finally, reaching for the locks on her manacles. Don't touch me. Her voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Don't you dare touch me. His hands fell away. Isolde, please. Please what? Please forgive you. Please understand. Please make this easier for you. She lifted her head higher, and he saw the full extent of what Vex had done. What he had ordered done. Her face was gaunt, cheekbones too prominent, eyes sunken. There were scars on her neck, her collarbone, disappearing beneath her torn clothing. You put me in chains. You called me a traitor. You had me tortured for 3 months. And worse, so much worse, you took another woman to your bed and made sure I could hear every sound while I bled in the dark. I was trying to hurt you. I wanted you to feel what I thought I felt. Congratulations, her eyes were dry now. She'd gone beyond tears. You succeeded. You hurt me in ways I didn't know it was possible to hurt. You took someone who loved you completely and you brutalized her because you were too damaged to believe in that love. I know. God, Isolde, I know. And I will spend the rest of my existence trying to. No, she shook her head slowly. You don't get to do that. You don't get to apologize and grovel and make yourself feel better. You made your choice, Draven. You chose pride over trust. You chose your mother's word over mine. You chose to believe the worst of me rather than fight for us. And now you have to live with that choice. I'll live with it, he said hoarsely. I'll carry this guilt until the end of time. But first, let me get you out of here. Let me get you medical attention. You're dying, Isolde, the nightsbane poisoning alone. I know I'm dying, she said it calmly, like stating a fact about the weather. I've known for weeks. The poison is too far advanced now. Even with treatment, it's probably too late. The words hit him like physical blows. No, we have healers. Ancient magic. We can. You can nothing, her voice hardened. You gave up the right to when you put me in these chains. Now get out. Isolde. Get out. The scream tore from her throat, raw and agonizing. Get out, get out, get out. I don't want your guilt. I don't want your apologies. I don't want you to see me like this, broken and weak and dying because of what you did. Just get out. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind him. Draven turned to see his brother Cale, accompanied by 2 guards carrying medical supplies. Brother, Cale said quietly. Let me handle this. Please. Draven looked back at Isolde one more time. She turned her face away, her whole body shaking with either rage or pain or both. He wanted to stay. Wanted to fall to his knees and beg her forgiveness. Wanted to somehow undo the last 3 months and make different choices. But he'd forfeited the right to any of that. Take care of her, he said to Cale, his voice barely audible. Whatever she needs. Whatever she wants. Even if what she wants is for me to disappear forever. He walked out of the cell, past his brother, back into the corridor. Behind him, he heard Cale speaking softly to Isolde, heard the clink of keys as he unlocked her manacles, heard her sob as her arms dropped and blood rushed back into oxygen-starved limbs. Draven made it 3 corridors away before he collapsed against the wall, blood tears streaming down his face, and was violently sick. The trial of Dowager Queen Morgantha took place 1 week later. By then, Isolde had been moved to the healing wing, though the physicians reported grimly that the Nightsbane had done its work well. She was stable for now, but the poison had compromised her organs. Without access to the kind of ancient magic that hadn't been practiced in centuries, she had months at best. Draven hadn't seen her since the dungeon. He'd tried, gone to the healing wing 3 times, stood outside her door for hours. But she'd given explicit orders that he was not to be admitted, and he honored them. It was the least he could do. Instead, he threw himself into preparing for his mother's trial with an obsession that worried even Cale. He compiled evidence. Interviewed witnesses. Built an ironclad case that would leave no room for doubt or mercy. The entire court would see exactly what Morgantha had done. Exactly how she'd manipulated them all. And they would see exactly how thoroughly Draven had failed. The throne room was packed again, but the atmosphere was different this time. 3 months ago, there had been excitement, scandal, the thrill of watching someone powerful brought low. Now there was tension. Uncertainty. If the Dowager Queen, pillar of the kingdom for 3 millennia, could be a traitor, what did that say about everything they thought they knew? Morgantha stood in silver chains at the base of the dais. Even bound and accused, she held herself like a queen. Her face showed no fear, no remorse. Only disdain for the proceedings. Draven sat on his throne, but he'd insisted that another chair be placed beside it, a smaller throne that had once belonged to his father. Cale sat there now, acting as co-judge. Draven had learned his lesson about allowing personal feelings to cloud judgment. This trial would have two perspectives, two voices. Balance. Dowager Queen Morgantha, Cale began, his voice formal and measured. You stand accused of high treason, conspiracy to commit murder, espionage, and crimes against the crown. How do you plead? Not guilty. Morgantha's voice was clear, unconcerned. These charges are fabrications designed to excuse my son's catastrophic error in judgment. I have done nothing but serve this kingdom faithfully for 3,000 years. Then you deny writing these letters. Draven held up the sheaf of correspondence recovered from the Lycan territories. You deny plotting to assassinate your own grandson? You deny framing an innocent woman for your own crimes? I deny nothing and admit nothing. I simply state that my actions, whatever they may have been, were taken in service of the kingdom's greater good. If I communicated with the Lycans, it was to gain intelligence on their movements. If I removed the human obstacle, it was because she was weakening your rule. I am not on trial here, your judgment is. The audacity of it stunned even the jaded court into silence. You admit it. Draven's voice was soft, dangerous. You actually admit to framing Isolde. I admit to removing a liability. The girl was making you soft, compromising your decision-making, encouraging policies that would have weakened us. She had to go. The method was regrettable, perhaps, but necessary. The method, Draven said, his hands gripping the throne's arms until the stone cracked beneath his fingers, was torture. 3 months of torture inflicted on an innocent woman. On someone his voice broke. He gathered himself with visible effort. On someone under the crown's protection. She was never worthy of that protection. She was human. Temporary. Insignificant in the grand scheme of. She was worth more than this entire court combined. Draven stood, descending the dais steps. The crowd parted before him like water. She risked her life to protect my brother. She gathered evidence of your treason for 8 months while you poisoned her. She endured torture without breaking, without confessing to crimes she didn't commit. And she did all of it because she loved me and wanted to protect my family. He stopped directly in front of his mother. You're right about one thing. I am on trial here. My judgment, my pride, my cowardice, all of it is being weighed and found wanting. But that doesn't absolve you. If anything, it makes your crimes worse. You didn't just betray the kingdom. You exploited my worst traits to destroy someone innocent. Someone you cared about, Morgantha corrected. Not someone valuable. There's a difference. No, a new voice said from the back of the throne room. There isn't. Every head turned. Isolde stood in the doorway, supported by 2 healers. She was dressed in simple clothing, her hair clean but unstyled, her face still gaunt but no longer grey with impending death. The healers had managed to slow the Nightsbane poisoning, though everyone knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Isolde, Draven breathed. You shouldn't be here. You need rest. I need to see justice done. She moved forward slowly, each step clearly painful. The crowd parted for her too, but their expressions were different than they'd been 3 months ago. Shame. Guilt. Recognition of their own complicity. When she reached the center of the room, she looked up at Morgantha. You wanted to know if I was valuable? If I mattered? Here's your answer. I mattered enough that you saw me as a threat. I mattered enough that you spent 8 months planning my destruction. I mattered enough that you were willing to commit treason just to remove me from his life. She gestured to Draven without looking at him. So yes. I was valuable. I just made the mistake of loving someone who couldn't see it until it was too late. Morgantha stared at her with open contempt. You're dying. The Nightsbane has done its work. Why come here to watch an old woman's trial when you could be spending your last days in comfort? Because I want you to see what you did. Isolde's voice was steady despite the pain she was clearly in. I want you to look at me, really look at me, and understand the cost of your ambition. You didn't just destroy one human woman. You destroyed your son. You destroyed any possibility of redemption for yourself. And for what? Control? Power. The sick satisfaction of proving you could? I regret nothing, Morgantha said coldly. I know. That's what makes you a monster, Isolde turned to Kale. Your Majesty. I've said what I came to say. Do with her what you will. I'll accept whatever judgment you pass. The judgment, Kale said carefully, is not mine alone to make. He looked at Draven. Brother. Draven stared at his mother. 3,000 years of history. 3,000 years of guidance, counsel, and what he'd thought was love. All of it a lie. Or if not a lie, then something so twisted and corrupted that it might as well be. Morgantha Nocturne, he said formally. You are guilty of all charges. The evidence is overwhelming. The confession, given in this very room, is binding. The sentence is death by sunlight at dawn 3 days hence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Death by sunlight was the most painful way a vampire could die, burning slowly as the sun rose, giving them hours to feel their immortality stripped away. Any last words? Draven asked. Morgantha smiled. Only this, you'll regret her far more than you'll regret me. That human will haunt you for the rest of your existence. And unlike me, she'll never truly be gone. You'll see her in every decision you make, every moment of happiness you can't quite reach, every woman who will never measure up to the ghost of what you destroyed. I gave you 3,000 years of loyalty. She gave you 2 years of vulnerability. Let's see which one you remember more clearly in a century. The guards took her away. The throne room slowly emptied. And Draven stood alone in the center of the vast space, his mother's words echoing in his mind, knowing with sick certainty that she was absolutely right. Isolde had already left, supported by the healers. She hadn't looked at him once during the entire trial. He'd never felt more alone in his 3 centuries of existence. That night, Kale found him in the empty throne room, still standing in the same spot hours later. You need to see her, Kale said without preamble. She doesn't want to see me. I don't care. You need to talk to her. To apologize properly. To what? Make myself feel better. Absolve my guilt. Draven laughed bitterly. She made it very clear in the dungeon that she doesn't want my apologies. That I don't get to ease my conscience at her expense. Then don't apologize for yourself. Apologize for her. Because she deserves to hear it. She deserves to know that you understand the magnitude of what you did. She knows. She was there. Draven Kale's voice hardened. For 3 months, that woman endured torture, isolation, and betrayal. She listened to you with another woman while she bled in chains. She gave up everything, including her will to live, because you broke her so thoroughly. And now she's dying because the poison was left too long in her system. She has months. Maybe weeks. And you're going to let pride keep you from even trying to make amends? It's not pride. It's respect. She told me to stay away. She told you that when she was chained to a wall, dying and traumatized. Maybe, just maybe, what she needs now is different. Kale grabbed his brother's shoulder, forcing him to meet his eyes. I've been sitting with her. Talking to her. And you know what I see. Someone who's still in love with you, even though she hates herself for it. Someone who's grieving not just what you did, but what you had. Someone who's dying with all of this unresolved. What would you have me do? Force her to listen to my apologies? Demand forgiveness? No. I'd have you humble yourself. Truly humble yourself. Not a royal apology where you maintain your dignity. Not a political gesture to save face. I mean, get on your knees and grovel. Mean it. Show her that you understand, not intellectually, but in your bones, what you took from her. Draven was silent for a long moment. Then, she'll reject me. She should reject me. Probably. But at least you'll have tried. At least you'll have given her the option. Kale released his shoulder. Mother was right about one thing. Isolde will haunt you forever. So the question is, will she haunt you as the woman you destroyed and abandoned? Or as the woman you destroyed and spent the rest of your existence trying to be worthy of? He left Draven alone with that question. 3 days later, Morgantha burned. Draven didn't attend the execution. Instead, he was in his chambers, the same chambers where he'd brought Sylvana, where Isolde had heard them together, packing. He'd already moved most of his belongings to a small guest room on the far side of the castle. This room held too many ghosts. Too many memories of his cruelty. There was a knock at the door. "Enter," he called, expecting Kale or a servant. Isolde stood in the doorway. She looked slightly better than she had at the trial. The healer's work was showing, some color had returned to her face, and she could stand without support. But she was still too thin, still visibly weakened. Still dying by inches. "Isolde," Treason breathed, standing so quickly he knocked over a chair. "What are you? You shouldn't be walking this far. Let me call the healers. I needed to see you." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Before you disappeared." "I'm not disappearing. I'm just moving. Kale is taking over as regent. I'm stepping back from active rule." "Why?" "Because I've proven myself unworthy of the crown. Because my judgment is compromised. Because he met her eyes. Because I need to become someone better than the man who hurt you. And I can't do that while sitting on a throne, pretending I deserve it." She studied him for a long moment. "Kale says you've been writing letters." "To me?" "Yes. Every day since the trial. I haven't sent them. I didn't think you'd want. I want to read them." He blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because I'm trying to understand. Trying to make sense of how someone who claimed to love me could do what you did." And because she looked away. "Because part of me, some stupid part that won't die no matter how hard I try to kill it, still needs to hear that what we had was real. That I didn't imagine it." Treason crossed to his desk, pulling out a stack of letters, at least 20 of them. He handed them to her with trembling hands. "It was real," he said hoarsely. "Every moment. Every word. Every promise. I loved you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. That's what makes this so unforgivable. I knew I loved you, and I destroyed you anyway." Isolde took the letters, holding them carefully. "I'm leaving," she said. "After I read these. The healers say travel is risky, but I can't stay here. Can't be in this castle, surrounded by memories and ghosts. Kale has arranged for me to go to a human settlement in the mountains. Somewhere quiet where I can spend whatever time I have left in peace." No, the word came out sharper than he intended. "Isolde, please. Let me help. Let me find better healers, ancient magic, something." "There is no something. The Nightsbane has done its work too well. I'm dying, Treason. We both know it. Then let me be there. Let me take care of you, make you comfortable, give you whatever you need." "What I need," she said, and there were tears in her eyes now, "is to not spend my last days watching you try to assuage your guilt. I need to not be your redemption project. I need to figure out how to die without hating the person I loved most in the world." The words were arrows, each one finding its mark in his chest. "I understand," he managed. I'll stay away. But Isolde, before you go, please know this, I am so sorry. For everything. For not believing you. For the torture. For Sylvana. For every moment of pain I caused. I would give anything, my crown, my immortality, my very existence, to undo it. But I can't. So all I can do is promise that I will spend every day of the rest of my life becoming someone who would never do that again." She nodded slowly. "Goodbye, Treason." "Wait," he moved toward her, then stopped himself. "The letters. After you read them. If you want to respond, if you want to tell me how much you hate me, if you want anything at all. I'll think about it." She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth. I don't hate you. I wish I did. It would be so much easier. But I don't." Then she was gone, and Treason was alone with the weight of everything he'd destroyed.